Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. In this video we'll learn about functions and events in Unreal Engine. We'll learn what functions and events are, how they both work, what are their main differences, and most importantly how you can create your own custom function or custom event in Unreal Engine. So let's get started. So before we continue to functions and events in Unreal Engine, I want to tell you what functions actually are in any programming language. So a function in any programming language refers to a small and reusable piece of code that you write and then use it inside your program as many times as you want. So when you create a program, you split that program into smaller functions and define their functionalities inside it. And later in your program, whenever you want to use any of the functionality that you created, you just simply call that function and then it is implemented. So let's say that we're creating our game and our game have a functionality where our player character can receive damage from maybe AI enemies, and also there are some places inside our level where when our player character overlaps with, we receive specific amount of damage. So instead of creating the damage logic again and again, we can create the damage function and then call it whenever we want. Now to create function, let's open up our player character blueprint because I only have this right now. And over here on the left side, right under the event graph, you can see the tab of functions. Now over here you have override, and then if you click on this plus icon, you can create a new function. We're gonna come back to override in a bit, but let's say we want to create a new function. So to do that, you need to click on this plus icon to create a new function, and now you can just simply rename it whatever you want. Maybe let's just simply call it as test function. You can compile and save, and here we have created our new test function. So if you mistakenly or by chance close this test function, you can again access it by simply double clicking on this test function and it will open the test function graph. Now you need to define this function's functionality inside here. So let's say from the execution pin, what we want is when our test function is called, we want to say print string, and what we want to print is we can just simply say test function successfully called, let's say, and we can compile and save. So we're saying that okay, whenever our test function is called, we want to do this, and what we are doing is we're just simply printing on the screen, and we're printing that the test function successfully called. So the test function is this, and we're just simply saying test function successfully called, so we can compile and save. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that the functions are a small piece of code that you write and then you have to manually call them in order for their execution. So over here we have created and implemented the functionality of our test function. Now, if we don't call it from anywhere our event graph, this function will not be called. So let's say when I press X key on my keyboard, so I search for X key over here. So let's say when I press X key, I want to call my test function. So how you can call that is from pressed, you can either search for test function like this, or you can just simply drag this test function into the event graph and then connect these pins. However, you can also drag this and then just simply release it while hovering this pressed to connect the execution automatically, and we can compile and save. Now what will happen is whenever I press X key on my keyboard, this test function or whatever the functionality we explain in test function would be executed. So let's say I play the game, and when I press X key, you can see that it is saying test function successfully called. And as many times as I press my X key, this our test function is being called. Now, similarly, you can create different functions inside your game, like maybe apply damage or pick up any item, and then you can call them whenever you need. Now, functions can also have some parameters defined to them. For example, the function that you create can also receive input, and then also it can just give some output depending on the calculations that you do inside your function. Now let's say that we want to modify our test function a little bit and we wanted to have an input. So how we're going to do that is you need to just simply click on this function, and then under the details panel you have inputs and then outputs. So to create an input, you need to click on this plus icon right next to input, and it will make a new input to it. And now you can just simply rename this variable whatever you want. Let's just rename it as maybe name, and then also you can change its value type. Let's set it to string because we want to print something, and we can compile and save. Now if I go back to my event graph, you can see that our test function has a new parameter, which is name, and its value type is string. Now we can just simply create a new variable over here and maybe type of string, and we can just simply connect it like this, or we can just simply delete it and we can just simply manually type something over here like this. So let's say instead of printing this test function successfully called, what we want is we want to print the string, or whatever we write over here we want to simply print that. Now there is one more thing that I want to tell you, is that instead of plugging this name value like this, what you can do is you can just simply right click and search for get name, and then if you scroll down you'll find your this variable over here. So you can just simply click it, and this variable indicates to this name that you pass in as an input, and you can connect it like this as well. So this method is useful for, let's say that you have all your functionality going on in this section, and you want to connect this to maybe something which is present somewhere around here really far. So instead of making your this function messier, like by dragging nodes from here and there, what you can do is you can just simply right click and get your variable or get your input like this, and then you can just simply plug it, as it will return the value of this. So for now I'm gonna delete it, and we can just simply keep it like this because our function is really small. And now if I compile and save, and now if I play my game, you can see that when I press X nothing is happening. And why? Because if I go back to my event graph, our name is none, or it is blank. Now let's say I go back to my test function, and from here I'm gonna unplug this, and let's say we drag a node from our name and we check if it is equal exactly string, equal to maybe blank or none, and we will add a branch. And if this condition is true, we can just simply say that no name defined like this. Oops, let me just remove this. And then if it is not blank, what we can do is we can just simply duplicate this, and we can just simply print our name. Now if you see that I connect this name like this, so it is making this node, and let's say it is looking messy to us. So how we can do that is I'm gonna unplug it, and I'm gonna right click, and we can search for get name, and we're gonna drag down, and over here is our name, which is again this value. So we can plug this like this. We can compile, save, and now I'm not gonna give any name yet. And if I play my game now and I press X, you can say it is saying no name defined. But let's say if we add some name, maybe Bob, and now if I compile, save, and now when I press X, it is saying Bob. Now functions can also have local variables assigned to them. Let's say that instead of this input, I'm gonna delete it like this, and we can just simply select these, and I'm gonna delete it, and I'm gonna delete, let's just delete everything, and we can compile and save. And it is giving me error because if I go back to my event graph, you can see that we have deleted the this name input, so we have to just simply right click and refresh node, and now we can compile and save. So what do I mean by local variable is right now I'm inside my test function, and on the left side right under the event dispatchers we have local variables. If I go back to my event graph, local variables will be removed. So that means that you can create some local variables for your functions, and then you can use them to calculate something inside your functions, or you can say that these variables, these local variables only work or only exist for the specific function that you have created these variables inside, and then you can use them to calculate something or maybe return some value. So to create a local variable, you need to go to this local variable tab right under the event dispatcher and click on this plus icon to add a new local variable. And I'm gonna rename it as name like this and type string. Now we can compile and save. And now if I drag it in my editor, you can see that there is a V symbol right above this variable, which indicates that this is local variable. And now if I go to my event graph, you can see that our local variable is not being shown. Or maybe if I open any other function like our move function or aim function, this local variable is also not being shown over here, because each and every function have their own separate local variables. So our this name function or this name this name local variable exists in our test function, so it is only shown inside our test function. So let's say we name it this time as JSON. JSON like this. And then what I want is I'm gonna click on this function and let's add an output to it. So this time this function will return an output of this name. So we have set the name to JSON, and then we can just simply connect like this. So now if I compile and save, and then I go to my event graph, and now you can see that this time this function is not receiving any input, but it is giving us some output. So what we can do is from here we can just simply say print string, and we can connect this value like this. So now when our test function is called, it will just return the value of our local name variable, which is JSON, and then it will be print on the screen. So now if I play and I press X, you can see now it is saying JSON. So that's how you create local variables for your functions, and you can create as many local variables as you want, and then use them to do some calculations and maybe return the result value. And also these local variables are assigned to specific functions in which they are created. So yeah, you cannot access them from outside the function, so just keep that in mind. Now functions also have access specifiers. So let's say if I click on this test function, you can see that over here we have access specifier, which is set to public. So whenever you create a new function in Unreal Engine, Unreal Engine by default creates it as a public function, which means that you can call it from anywhere, maybe from any other blueprint other than your third person character. So if you have reference to your third person character, you can call this function from anywhere. So if you want to change it, you can set it to protected or maybe private. So it is basically up to you, but to change it you just need to select this, and then you can change it from here. If you want to set it to private, you can set it to private, and then you cannot call it from any other classes. And if you set it to protected, then you can call it from inside your current class or any child class of this third person character. Now there are two types of functions in Unreal Engine: pure function and impure function. For example, if I go back to my event graph, and over here we have our test function that we just created, and if I unplug it, now in order for this function to be called, we need to connect the execution pins from where we want to execute it or from where we want to call this function. So let's say we said that when I press X on my keyboard, I want to call this function. So in order to call this function, we must connect the execution like this. So basically this function is impure function, because impure functions need execution in order to execute. So let's say that if I go to my test function and then I click on this, and from here you can click on this checkbox right next to pure. So if you click on this and then compile, you can see that this function is now pure function, which means that this function do not need any execution now. So over here what we're saying that when I press X key, we are printing string, and what we're trying to print is our, again, just simply the same name, and we can connect it like this. So what will happen is, now if you see when I press X, we're saying JSON like before, but now you just see that this function is now converted from impure to pure, and now this function doesn't need any execution pins. Now usually in Unreal Engine you use impure functions which requires executions, and you only use pure functions where you want to do some calculations or you want to do some checks, like for example you want to check if your player character is alive, or you want to check that your player character have sufficient amount of stamina in order to drain the stamina. So functions like these where you only have to do some calculation or you just want to check a certain value, then it is good that you can use pure functions. And again, you can create any function to be pure by just simply clicking on that and setting it to pure from here. Now if you remember, when you try to cast to your maybe player controller or maybe your player character or whatever, and then from object you usually search for get player controller like this. So this is also a function, but this is also a pure function. As you can see, they both are in green color, so they both are pure functions. So this is also a function, but again it also doesn't need to any execution pins in order to execute. So this is also a pure function. Or maybe if you get your player character like this, and this is also pure functions. So any function which have f over here and is in green color is basically pure function. Now let's see how events work in Unreal Engine. So similar to functions, you can also create custom events for your game. So how to do that is, you can just simply right click on your event graph and you can search for custom event. And like functions, you can just simply rename it. We can call it as test event, and we can compile and save. Now similar to functions, your custom events can also have inputs. So in order to add input to your custom event, you can select your event, which is test event, and from here let's click on this plus icon to add an input, and I'm gonna name it as name as well, and we can compile save. And then let's say we again want to print string, so we can just simply drag a node and we can call print string like this and connect the name. Now if you remember, when we created our test function, we said that when our test function is called, we want to print the name whatever we are passing it as an input. And I told you that you can either connect this node like this, or you can just simply search for get name, and you can get this variable and then connect it, because this variable indicates to this value. However, in custom events you cannot do that. So let's say if I search for get name, you can see that I have no variable which indicates to this name. So in custom events you need to connect the inputs like this, and you cannot do it like this way. So now we have created our test event, and let's say when we press X we want to call this test event, and this time let's rename it as maybe Anna. And when I compile save, and now when I press X, you can see that we can call our custom event. So custom events and custom functions that you create in Unreal Engine, basically they both work pretty much same. They both share some similarity, like you can add their functionalities and then you can call them as many times as you want. However, now we're going to talk about some main differences between functions and custom events. Now, first of all, functions in Unreal Engine can have input as well as functions can also return some outputs. For example, you can again do some calculations inside the function and then you can pass the result to do something with the result maybe. But and for the custom events, you can only have inputs and you cannot have any output. So for example, if you want to do some calculation, maybe you want to calculate damage or you want to add two numbers and then maybe output the result, then you need to use functions because they can allow you to do calculations and then pass the result. And events can only have inputs, which means that they can receive input like this, but they cannot give any output. Now, functions in Unreal Engine can either be pure functions or impure functions. So if you're creating a function which is mainly responsible for maybe calculating damage or any other calculation, you can just simply select it and then from here you can make it pure. So next time when you call it, you don't need execution pens. However, when you create a custom event, you cannot set it to be pure or impure event. Custom events always be impure, and whenever you want to call some specific custom event, you need to connect the execution pins in order to call that specific event. Now, custom events that you create in Unreal Engine can be replicated. As you can see that if I select my this test event over here in the details panel, we have replicate section, and over here we can just simply set the value, like we can multicast, run on server, or it is up to you, basically for multiplayer. So in our functions, over here we have our test function. You can see that we don't have any replication section inside this details panel. So if you're creating some event for your multiplayer or something like that, then you have to create event because events can be replicated and functions cannot be replicated. Also, for functions in Unreal Engine, you can create some local variables that are assigned to that specific function in which they are created, and then you can use them for doing calculations or maybe storing some value temporarily. But for custom events, you cannot create any local variable. However, you can use the variables that are present inside your blueprints, but you cannot create any exclusive variable that you can assign to this specific event. Now there are some nodes or predefined functions that you can call inside custom event, but you cannot call inside your function. For example, we have a delay node. So if I search for delay over here, so you can see that we can add a delay inside our custom event. But let's say if we want to add a delay inside our function, so if I search for delay, you can see that the delay function is not being shown over here. That means that we cannot add delay inside our function. Now similarly, there are more functions like async save game to slot and async load game from slot that you can call from custom event like this, but you cannot call them from your custom function. Let's say if I want to search async save game to slot, you can see that I will not get it. However, I can have normal save game to slot and maybe load game from slot as well, but I will not get the async one. Also, if I search for maybe play montage, which is this one, I can also call this from my custom event. But however, if I want to call this montage inside this function, you can see that when I search for this, I search for play montage, I cannot call that one, but I can call this play any montage, which is this node. So yeah, there are some nodes that can be called from event, but you cannot call them from inside the function. Now there are some also nodes like maybe set timer by event, and you can also have set timer by function name. So for timer by event, you can just simply bind the event. Now over here I cannot bind it or I cannot plug it, and it is because the event that we are trying to add, that should not have any inputs because it is again predefined delegates. So if we have any input in our our custom event have an string input, so if I delete it, now I compile and save, you see that we are getting error over here. Let's just refresh it, and now if I compile save, and now you can see that I can just simply connect it like this. And similarly for function name, so we have our test function. You can just simply enter the name test function. However, if you want to use the set timer by event and then you want to call your test function, how you can do that is from event, you can just simply create event like this, and then you can select the function over here. And again, our function should not have any inputs, but this test function have this name input as well. So let's say if I remove it, input and output, and I compile save, now we can see that if I select the function, if I scroll down, we can have our test event, and there should be test function somewhere as well. So let me search for test event. Nope, we're only getting test function. Maybe because of this node. Compile save, and let me go back here. And now if I, so yep, there we go, we have our test function as well. So if your test function is maybe pure function, you cannot call that, I am pretty sure. Yep, you can see that if I change this test function from pure to impure, now I can just simply add it as well. Name cannot be found, and this which name? Oops, this name. Okay, no worries. Compile save, and yep, if I now select, and there we have our test function. So that's how you can just simply bind it. If you want to bind a function with your timer, you can use this create event node, or you can also maybe do it like this, or if you're maybe this event is placed somewhere else, you can use this node and then select your this test event, and then you can bind it like this as well. So lastly, the custom events are mainly called or mainly used when you want to create a gameplay event. Like if you remember, for our player character, if I go to my capsule component and I right click, then we have some events. If I go to add event, we have on component hit, begin overlap, end overlap. Let's say if I add this begin overlap, so this event can only be called when my this capsule collision basically overlaps with something. So you cannot call this on component begin overlap other than when this capsule component is not being overlapped with something, because when our capsule component overlap with any actor inside our level, Unreal Engine basically thinks it as a gameplay event, or you can say that okay, overlapping of our player character with any actor acts as a gameplay event, that okay, something should happen. So usually you create events when you want to create some gameplay events, or you want to do something. However, there are much more custom, or not custom but predefined events, like on uh, maybe any damage, like this event any damage, which again triggers when we call this function apply damage. So basically when we call this function, which is predefined function of Unreal Engine for applying damage, then we are basically applying damage, and in the background it just dispatches an event, and then this event any damage listens to that event, and then something is called when that event is dispatched. So that's how it basically works. So if you want to create some gameplay event, you should create custom events. And if you want to do some calculations or do some normal functionality that you want to call again and again, then you can use your custom functions. Now lastly, we want to talk about the functions which are under the override section. So if I go to the functions and then right next to it we have override, now you can see that we have actor begin cursor over. And if I select it, it will create a function. So basically the main functionality is predefined, and when the our mouse cursor begin to overlap some actor, an event is dispatched, and then whatever we just explain over here, or whatever functionality we add here, would be then executed. Basically, this event is bind to the event dispatcher that is being created in the background, you can say. And then again, we have actor on released, actor on clicked. We also have some other functions that we can create custom functionality to them. And then maybe we have point damage, and then maybe uh, I don't know, maybe tick, event tick, which is in this one. And then we can have our hit, event hit, and then maybe on jumped. You can also use on landed or on launched and on landed as well. So basically all of these are predefined events that are somewhere binded to event dispatchers. Let's say we have event jump. So for example, we have a function which is jump for jumping, or making our character to jump. So when we jump, at the background there is a event dispatcher that is connected with it, and when we jump, a event is dispatched, and this is the listener event, you can say. So basically, when the on jumped event dispatcher is dispatched, then whatever we say over here is then called. And similarly, we have on landed, and we also have a function, maybe stop jumping. So then when this stop jumping function is called, another event is dispatched, which is bind to this on landed. So whatever we add over here would be called when on landed event is dispatched. So that's how basically events work, and these are again predefined events that you can override. So that's how you can override predefined functions or predefined events in Unreal Engine. And that's it for this video. I hope you guys like it, and if you guys like it, please make sure to leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.